Hello, my dear students. Today we'll talk about the standing order certification. We'll talk about the certification process. Under section 3 of the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946, submission of draft for standing orders is given. Section 3 of the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act requires every employer of an industrial establishment to submit draft for standing orders in which the rules relating to matters set out in this schedule proposed by him for adoption in his industrial establishment. Such a draft should be submitted within 6 months of the commencement of the act to the certifying officers, and failure to do so is punishable and is further made a continuing offense. And the draft of the standing orders must be accompanied by particulars of workmen employed in the establishment, as also the name of the trade union, if any, to which they belong. And within 6 months from the date on which this act becomes applicable to an industrial establishment, the employer shall submit to the certifying officer 5 copies of the draft of standing orders proposed by him for adoption in his industrial establishment. So, my dear students, this is a very, important point, that while you are submitting a draft for the, standing orders, you will be submitting it in 5 copies. So, certifying officer will be taking 5 copies of the draft of standing orders, which would be proposed by the employer and adoption in his industrial establishment. And provision shall be made in such draft for every matter set out in this schedule, which may be applicable to the industrial establishment, and where model standing orders have been prescribed, shall be, so far as practicable, in conformity with such model. And under subsection 4 of the section 3, if the industrial establishment are of similar nature, the group of employers owning those industrial establishment may submit a joint draft also. So, if there is a group of employers in similar industrial establishments, they may submit a joint draft of standing orders under this act. And the items which have to be covered by these standing orders, in respect of which the employer has to make a draft for submission to the certifying officer, are matters specified in the schedule. The matter referred to in the schedule are, now we are just focusing that what matters are referred in the schedule. Number 1 is classification of workmen, that is whether the permanent worker or the temporary, or he's working as an apprentice, or he's on probation, or is a badli worker. So all those would be just specified there. And manner of intimating to workmen periods and hours of work, holidays, pay days, and wage rates. So this has to be specified. Shift of working, attendance, the attendance of the workman, and the late coming, all those provisions will be there. And conditions of procedure in applying for, and the authority which may grant leave and holidays. Say for example, any worker is looking forward for a leave, so you must clarify that in what way he would be applying for the leave, who will grant the leave, what would be the procedure of applying for that leave. So all those things you are supposed to specify there in your standing orders. Then requirement to enter premises by certain gates and liability to search. So again, this has to be specified in the standing orders of that industrial establishment, that what would be the entry gate for the premises, so that workers will come across, okay, fine, we have to use this gate for the entry or this gate for the exit. And they must be told through these standing orders that they are under certain liabilities to search while they are coming to the organization, while they are leaving the organization. So all those things would be mentioned in the uh, standing orders. Then the very important item is the closing and reopening of these sections of the industrial establishments, and the temporary stoppages of work. If there is some temporary stoppage, then what would be the procedure, how the workers would be intimated, and the right and liabilities of the employer and workmen arising out or arising there from. So there has to be specific clear cut rules regarding the closing and reopening of the sections of the industrial establishments, and the if there is any temporary stoppage of work, then what uh, rule you will be following, what standing orders are defining about that, and the right and liabilities of the employer and workman arising therefrom. See, with the help of standing orders, we will just clarify that what would be the rights, what would be the liabilities regarding all those items of an employer and the workmen, those who are working in the establishment. And the very important item which is very important to know is the termination of the employment, about the termination of the employment and the notice thereof to be given by the employer and workman. Means, on what are those conditions when when a workman can be terminated from the employment, and how the notice would be served or given to the workman, and how the employer will give that notice. All those rules, we need to mention while we are framing the standing orders. Suspension, the next and very important item related to the uh, standing orders is the suspension or dismissal for misconduct. In case if the employer is suspending someone, some workman, or dismissing some workman for any misconduct, or this suspension or this dismissal is on account of the any act which was the workman was not supposed to perform, or for any omission, maybe, means the workman has omitted to do certain work for which he was supposed to do, and which constitute misconduct. So if in case of any suspension or dismissal of for misconduct and act or omission which constitute misconduct, uh, uh, there has to be clear cut guidelines in those standing orders by the employer. And again, one more item which we should incorporate while we are framing these standing orders is the means of redress of workmen, means of redress of for workmen against unfair treatment. If the workman is, workman has experienced some unfair treatment, then in what way he can go for the redressal of that unfair treatment, or wrongful exactions maybe by the employer, or maybe by the agent of the employer or the servant of the employer. So we should clarify, or we should incorporate this item also in our standing orders, that in what way workman would be just going for the for redressing this unfair treatment. So these are the important items which while the employer is making the standing orders, should in all those items should be incorporated in the standing orders. And apart from all those what we have discussed, any other matter which may be prescribed, that can also be included in these standing orders which may be prescribed. So once again, my dear students, for your uh, comfort, for your convenience, I am repeating all those items which we should incorporate while we are framing these standing orders. The classification of workmen, whether the permanent, temporary, apprentice, probationary, or badlis, and manner of intimating to workmen periods and hours of work, that in what way you will communicate to your workmen that what would be your working hours, when you will be availing the holidays, what would be your pay days, what would be your wage rates, all those things with the help of those standing orders, which should inform to the, because the employee is having this right, that he must be, the employee must know, or the workman must know about the terms of the employment, or the establishment where he is performing, where he is working, what are the terms and conditions of that employment. The workman should also be intimated about the shift working through standing orders, that in what sort of shifts would be applicable to that in industrial establishments. And if the workman is coming to the industrial establishment, in what way he would be registering his attendance, in what way he would be mentioning the late comings, what would be the repercussions of the late coming. All those things should be clarified through standing orders. And the conditions of procedure in applying for that, I have already discussed, that in what way you would be applying for the leave, who would be the granting authority for your leaves and your holidays maybe. And then requirement to enter the premises by certain gates and liability to search. The workman should be well intimated that what gate he or she should use while entering in the premises or the establishment, and what liabilities the workman would be under uh, to search. Because see, there are certain establishment where they, say for example, some industry is into electronic goods manufacturing maybe. So there are very costly small chips or the electronic devices. So it is the liability of the workmen which may be imposed with the help of standing orders, that while they are leaving the premises, they have to go for under this liability to search, and then only they are supposed to leave the premises. And then closing and reopening of the sections of the industrial establishments and temporary stoppages of work, that when the establishment will close, when it will reopen, what would be the timings, if there is any temporary stoppage of work, then the right and liabilities of the employers and workmen arising therefrom, under what liabilities the workmen and the employers would be in these temporary stoppage of work cases. So all those things are very essential for while you are framing the standing orders. A workman, an employer is framing the standing orders, and the termination of the employment and the notice thereof to be given by the employer and work. Suspension or dismissal for misconduct and act or omissions which constitute misconduct, that has to be the part and parcel of the standing order, so that a workman would be aware that what wrong they have performed, what wrong they have done, and there would be a check on the act of the employer as well, that if the employer is suspending someone, dismissing someone for any misconduct, for any act or omission of the workman, which constitute misconduct. So both the parties would be aware about this, and the in what way the redressal of the grievance or the unfair treatment or the wrongful exactions by the employer or his agents or servant. Or apart from these, the very important is the if any other matter which may be prescribed for the purpose or which may serve for the harmonious industrial relationship building, may be incorporated in the standing orders. Some other item may be included in the standing orders. So this is all about the standing orders certification process and the items which we can incorporate while we are framing the standing orders. So this is all, my dear students, for today's lecture. I believe this lecture will help you. And again, as usual, I'm advising you that whenever you are just going through those PPTs, you all are requested to just have a look of the Bear Act also, so that if there is some sort of gap, you can just fill that gap with the help of your notes and by referring the Bear Act. Thank you so much for patience listening. Have a nice day. God bless you all. Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.